Oh, we're back. Welcome, everyone, to tonight's meeting of the Clyde Sukeforth chapter of SABR. I'm Bruce McClure, the chapter chair, and we always hold our meetings in conjunction with the Gardner-Waterman chapter of SABR in Vermont, Dr. Clayton Truder, chair. Now, before we get started tonight with everything, we're going to start it in the traditional manner, and I'm going to throw it over to Joanne Hulbert from Boston, who hopefully has a poem for us. Joanne, what do you got this evening?
All right. Pittsburgh has been mentioned a little bit before all this and a few other things. This is a poem from 1901 from the Sporting News. So it takes us all back, but hang in there. So here it is. A dweller in St. Louis stood by the muddy creek. His voice was tired and feeble, and his limbs were wobbly, weak. The moon came out of hiding just to hear what he might say and winked with lots of feeling as he sighed his soul away. We thought we had the pennant as a cinch for this old town, but the rude, rough gang from Pittsburgh has contrived to throw us down. There is no balm in Gilead, we only moan and squeak, for it's paralyzed in St. Louis by the creek. Ta-da!
Love it. That's fantastic. Thank you, Joanne. I appreciate you. Where's Jeff Cohen? Jeff, you've got something to tell us about your pod. Why don't you go?
I do. Thank you very much, Bruce, and welcome back.
Thank you.
Since we missed a couple of weeks, just want to let you know the last couple of episodes that were released on baseball and BBQ. It was we had Ed Lynch on a couple of weeks ago. He has a fascinating story. He was a Met pitcher. He was a GM of the Cubs. Also, he was a scout for the Twins. He has a fascinating story. Then the following week, 7-5, this one we just dropped with Mark Wicker. He has a book called Up and In, The Life of a Dodger Legend, all about Don Drysdale. Again, very, very good book. And upcoming this week, we have former Major League pitcher Denny Nagel on the show. So please tune into Baseball and BBQ on all your podcast apps. If
you're not listening to Baseball and BBQ on your podcatcher, program your podcatcher to download that automatically. It's a really great podcast. That's one of Molly's favorites, along with This Week in Baseball History. Mike and Bill, if you're out there, we love you too. But good stuff, Jeff. Thanks a lot. All right, we've had a good couple of weeks off. I'm rested up. I'm ready to go. But a couple of things. We were down in Keene on Saturday night to watch the Keene Swamp Bats. We set up a tent. We had a bit of a membership drive down there and a little fellowship time as well. Signed up a couple of new members, which is great. Watched some great NECBL action. And if you're near Keene anytime, you got to get to a game. I'm going to tell you why. That place is banged out. They must have had 2,000, 2,200 there for a College Wood bat game. It was fantastic. The atmosphere is a lot of fun. It's really inexpensive to go. So, you got to get to one of these games if you're down that way. KeeneSwampBats.com. Look them up. See when the next game is. They were really great to us. We're going to be appearing there again in a couple of weeks. Wednesday night, 7 p.m., the Elysian Fields chapter is going to have friend of our chapter, Dan Schlossberg, talking about his new book, The New Baseball Bible. You want to get down there to see that because he's great too. Go to the SABR events calendar, click Wednesday, and then you'll see this meeting come up. You can sign up there for that meeting. Don't miss it. It's going to be a good one. All right, on to our feature presentation. Here we go. You expect stories of hardship, of fortune and failure, of the relentless pursuit of gold. But you don't expect baseball too. But in the Klondike, amidst the chaos and the cold, baseball thrived because it was offered something the hunt for gold could not. Community, camaraderie, and a piece of home in a world turned upside down. Men who faced the gnawing loneliness of the northern nights, who battled the despair of empty pans and broken dreams, of solace in the simple joy of the game. It eased the ache of homesickness, the sting of disappointment, the fear of the unknown. Gold brought the men to the Klondike, but men brought baseball. In the years that followed, scholars and storytellers would document nearly every detail of the Great Gold Rush, the stampeders' harrowing climbs over Chilkoot Pass, the primitive living conditions, the staggering wealth that flowed from Bonanza Creek. But buried beneath these grand narratives lies another story. hidden as much as the gold once was, waiting to be discovered, one of the impoverished battlefields and makeshift bats of games played under the midnight sun of Arctic summers. That is this story. It is about how America's pastime found its way to the last frontier and what happened when it got there. SABR member Steve Rennie is a baseball writer and researcher who lives in Ottawa. A former journalist who covered Canadian politics from Parliament Hill for nearly a decade, his reporting garnered him 2 National Newspaper Awards and 3 Canadian Association of Journalists Award nominations. Steve is the president of the Frank Shaughnessy chapter and was co-editor of the 2025 book From Bytown to the Big Leagues, 150 Years of America's Pastime in Canada's Capital. He has a particular interest in 19th century baseball in Canada and is here tonight to give his presentation, Diamonds in the Rough, Amazing Stories of Baseball During the Klondike Gold Rush. Steve Rennie, my friend, welcome back to Northern New England. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me. Awesome to be back here. I so much enjoyed the time that I was here last year, so really, really glad to be back again. Let me just start sharing my screen.
It is all yours, my friend. I'm stepping aside.
Okay, so hang on a second while I figure this out here. Okay, can everybody see the screen? All good? Okay. So thanks again for the invite. Really excited to be here today. So I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about baseball during the Klondike Gold Rush, and I'm going to be telling it primarily through the stories of 3 people that I'll talk about in a minute. Bruce and I chatted a little bit beforehand. I do have other slides on baseball in the north and games being played on the Arctic ice in Hudson Bay and Cumberland Sound, but we can maybe do that another time if there's interest and people are keen to learn more. Not everybody's super familiar with the Gold Rush, so I will start with a very, very high-level timeline of some of the key events. So in 1867, the United States purchases Alaska from Russia. 29 years later, George Carmack, Skookum Jim, and Dawson Charlie, so 3 prospectors, are in Rabbit Creek, which would be later sort of ground zero for the Gold Rush. And they find gold, and this is really what sets off the whole gold rush. So they put some of this gold into an old Winchester cartridge, and then they head on back to 40 Mile, where all the other prospectors to this point are really focused. I'll tell that story in a little bit, but that's just where they are in 1896. 1897 is really what sparks the gold rush. 2 steamships make their way back from the Klondike, and they're carrying miners who have, they were some of the earliest ones there, and they're carrying, in some cases, fabulous, fabulous wealth. So one steamship goes to San Francisco, the other one goes to Seattle. As they get off, it's massive news, and at a time when the nation is still coming out of the panic of 1893, so the economy is depressed, and you've got now the potential of making it rich by going to the Klondike and if you believe the newspapers, gold just falling at your feet. So that's really what kicks off the gold rush. You can see here on the right, I've got a map which shows the different routes that you could take to get to the Klondike. So there was a couple of the more typical ones were going through Dyea or Skagway. There was the all-water route, or the rich man's route, where you would essentially go up into the Bering Sea, and then you'd go down a river all the way into the Klondike. Not many made it, not because it was particularly dangerous, but because the barges would get stuck or frozen, and it was extremely expensive. So not many could afford that. So most of them climbed over the Chilkoot Pass or the White Pass in Dyea or Skagway. There were a few overland routes. They were not typically successful. So you had an all-Canadian route from Edmonton, extremely lengthy trip through brush, no roads, no trails. Most of the people who took that trail did not make it. So that's just to set the scene a little bit about where we are. I'm going to tell it through the perspective of 3 people, and 2 of them are here. So Clarence and Henry Barry are the 2 brothers. So you can see this picture of Clarence and Henry with their wives. Clarence is on the far left. Henry is second from the right, and then their wives Ethel and Tot standing next to each of them. I'm going to tell as well through a gentleman named Dan Dugdale, and then there'll be some other characters that pop up along the way. But I think these three characters really tell the story in a very interesting way. So let's start with Clarence. Clarence Berry is born in 1867 in Central Valley of California. He's one of a number of children, including an older brother, Frank. Alaska Frank, he goes up and does some prospecting in the 1880s and early 1890s. A really, really ambitious guy. From a young age, he's very driven, he's motivated. He's working as a farmer, but the business is not successful and gets caught up in a depressed economy later on. And so he's always looking to start a business. He started a harness business at one point. He was really a very keen, motivated, driven guy. So that's Clarence. Henry, polar opposite. Joker, lazy, had a supernatural ability to avoid work. He is the second youngest of the family. Really, really good baseball player, though. So with the local team in Selma, he's their cleanup hitter. He bounces around to a lot of different jobs. He can't really commit to anything. He's always late to things. While Clarence is really hardworking, Henry is he's a janitor, he's a night watchman. There's a story about how he doesn't really take things too seriously. So as he's working as a night watchman at a hospital, part of his duties included helping the doctors with the patients. And so one of the things he's told is to give one of the patients a sleeping pill. So he wakes the patient up to give him a sleeping pill just to show that he doesn't really take things very seriously. He's a real joker. He does inspire a poem nearly 60 years after the fact called Berry at the Bat. And so essentially the poem is about Henry shows up late to a game as usual. So it's a Sunday game. They're in the ninth inning, so he's extremely late, according to the poem. Selma's down 3-0 to their rivals, Lemoore. Henry's not wearing a uniform. He's still in his Sunday clothes. And so they scramble. He's a little stocky. So they scramble and they squeeze him into a uniform and they get him out there. And what do you know? There's bases are loaded. Henry gets up to the plate, hits a home run, and then they win the game. As he's running around the bases, his pants split, and then gives the crowd a little bit more than they bargained for. I don't know how much poetic license was taken with this, but it tells a funny story, and it's typical of Henry, as you'll see. It's a guy who shows up late to the game when it looks like he's going to miss out on everything, and then still manages to find success, which we'll see in the Klondike in a little bit. So here you can see a picture of Clarence and Henry in their baseball uniforms from the early 1890s, and there's an article here on the left-hand side, and you can see all three of the four Berry brothers played. So Frank Berry, the oldest, was playing first base. Clarence was on third, and Henry was at center field. And there's a few of these articles from the early 1890s that just show the Berry brothers playing baseball. But Clarence is, like I said, really, really ambitious guy. His brother, Frank, had been going to Alaska, like I said, since the 1880s. And as Clarence is seeing businesses go under and his own farm and his family farm is struggling, he decides that he's going to go north. And so in 1894, he goes up with Frank and he stays for about a year, a little over a year. Comes back to California in the spring of 1896 and gets married to his wife, Ethel. Immediately the next day, they get married, and then immediately the next day they're on the way back to the Klondike, because Clarence is determined to get rich and he wants Ethel there with him. He doesn't want to spend another year and a bit up in the Klondike away from Ethel. So once they're married, he takes her with him, and she's gung-ho and really embraces the life that they're going to lead up in the Klondike. So they go to 40 Mile, which is not in the same place as Dawson City and where they find gold later in Bonanza Creek and El Dorado Creek. It's a little bit further away, but there's a settlement there. And so that's where Clarence is. He's in the right place at the absolute right time. So Clarence doesn't have a ton of success immediately while he's in 40 Mile. And so he ends up tending bar in another prospector saloon, Bill McPhee, who has a saloon. Bill McPhee goes to Circle City for something, and he needs Clarence to tend the bar. Clarence needs to make some money, so he says, sure. He gets behind the bar. He happens to be there one day in August behind the bar when George Carmack, you can see here on the left, bursts into the bar. And he is now fresh off finding his gold up in Rabbit Creek, as I mentioned up at the beginning of this presentation, and doesn't let the other prospectors in the bar know right away that he's found gold. He steals himself. He goes to the bar, takes a couple of shots. He's not a big drinker, so this strikes Clarence as a little bit odd. So he's working up the nerve, and then he turns around and announces that he's found gold. Now, the prospectors kind of laugh because George Carmack is not a trustworthy narrator here. He's known for lying, and he's, they don't really take him too seriously, the other prospectors. Part of that may be but the fact that he was married to an Indigenous woman, and there were some obviously racial prejudices there, and they didn't take that too seriously. So they don't believe him, and so he takes his Winchester cartridge that I told you he filled up with gold, turns it over on the bar table, and all these gold nuggets come out of it, and that sets off these prospectors into a mad rush to find whatever they can get down to the to Rabbit Creek. So Clarence gets there and starts right away. He's staked his claim. He's digging away and stakes a few other ones as well. So basically, he's trying to grab up whatever land he can. And he finds gold one November night, and it's all around him. He's like 12 feet deep into the ground. He's digging. It's dark. The candle light's reflecting off the walls, and it's just filled with gold. And so he's really hit the mother lode at this point. And so he calls up to his brother, and they start mining it, and they're taking all kinds of gold out of the ground. So he becomes fabulously rich. And he's writing to his brother Henry at the time. So I remember we talked about Henry being lazy and late to the game. Henry's still back in California. He's not really having a whole lot to do. He's bouncing around jobs like I talked about. And Clarence is saying, like, you need to come here. Their gold is coming out of the ground. Everybody's striking it rich. If you don't come, you're going to miss out. And so finally, Henry agrees. And so Henry, in March of 1897, makes his way with his another brother up to the Klondike, and stays there for a little over a year. Clarence, though, comes back in July of 1897 on one of those steamships with about $130,000 of gold at the time, so a little over $1 million today. So he's extremely wealthy from his gold finds. The Excelsior and the Portland are the two steamships, and when they arrive in San Francisco and in Seattle, that's the trigger for the gold rush. That's really what gets people just mesmerized and fascinated and obsessed with the idea that they can go up there and also strike it rich. So Clarence is held up as this massive success story, struggling fruit farmer from Selma, California, now rich beyond his wildest dreams. So you can see here on the left-hand side, the cover of the Seattle Post-Intelligencer, gold. And there's some scenes here on the top from what the crowd would have looked like in San Francisco when they were on the docks. And then on the bottom, you've got the Portland that came into Seattle. While all this is happening, Dan Dugdale is a journeyman ball player. He's bouncing around the minor leagues, and he's in Kansas City. He had a couple of spells in the majors with Kansas City and with Washington. He's playing for a minor league team also in Kansas City, the Blues in the Western League in the summer of 1897. So as Clarence is getting off the ship, rich beyond his wildest dreams, Dan's not having a ton of success in his career. He's he's getting towards the end. He's put on some weight. He's coming to the realization that maybe he needs to find something else to do with his life. Maybe he's not. Maybe baseball playing, his career is winding down. He needs to find something else. You can see he's bounced around a lot of teams there. So this is his Sporting News player card, and you can see all the teams there on the left-hand side. So he's playing in this game, like I said. He's with the last place Kansas City club. He's playing catcher. He's just joined the club. He'd been managing the Peoria club. And so he decides at this point that he's going to go to Seattle. He's going to join the gold rush. He's going to put baseball aside, and he's going to try to make it rich like so many others have tried. So he gets to Seattle and he's standing on the dock and he's ready to go. He's got his gear, he's got a newspaper, and then a ship comes in and this ship starts unloading coffins. 25 coffins come off this ship, and they're all victims of an avalanche that happened in April of 1898. And Dan's looking at this thinking, I don't know if I want to go to the Klondike anymore. Maybe it's a little too dangerous for me. And so he decides he's going to stay. He decides that it's not worth the risk, and he'll try to make a life for himself in Seattle. And that changes the course of baseball in the Pacific Northwest. He helps establish the Seattle Klondikers and the Pacific Northwest League. So this Pacific Northwest League starts in the spring of 1898. Doesn't last very long. It folds in August, and there's all kinds of financial issues with the clubs before it's later reestablished. He's a very important figure in early Seattle baseball. So he builds several ballparks, including one named after him. He leads a number of teams to championships. And Jeff Obermeyer, who wrote the SABR book, Rain Check, called him the father of Seattle baseball in their 2006 book. He died in 1934 after getting run over by a truck while he was crossing the street. But had he gone to the Klondike, it's possible that a lot of this stuff wouldn't have happened, and maybe you wouldn't have Dugdale Park, and you wouldn't have had some of the other parks that were built, and maybe baseball in the Pacific Northwest would have taken a different course. So we've talked about the Berry brothers. We've talked about Dan Dugdale. What's happening actually in the Klondike now in terms of baseball? So what are people doing? So we'll start in Skagway. So Skagway is one of the two towns along with Dyea where would have been the jumping off points to the gold rush. You may have heard about a character named Soapy Smith. Soapy Smith, notorious con man from the 1880s, 1890s. He had ran schemes in Colorado and other places. But in 1897, Soapy Smith decides that he's going to go to Skagway and he's going to set up his enterprise there. So he goes in August of 1897 up to the Klondike, up to Skagway. Doesn't stay that long, stays for a month and a bit, almost 2 months, and then heads back to the Midwest, recruits some associates to come up to the Klondike with him, and heads back in January, and that's really where he gets established. So you can see a bit of his timeline there. So he's back in January of 1898. He's very much, he looks for ways to gain respectability. So he starts a saloon. He's involved in a number of enterprises around town. In addition to all the criminal activity that he's involved with, he's also trying to give himself this veneer of respectability, this idea that he is, a social influencer in the Skagway. And so one of those things, we think, may have been a baseball club. There's evidence that Soapy Smith may have been involved with the Skagway Baseball Club. It's not definitive, but I will walk you through it and you can make up your mind if you think that he had any involvement. In a book by an author named Howard Clifford called Soapy Smith, Howard prints an excerpt of an article that appeared in one of the Skagway newspapers. Now, neither I nor researchers in Skagway can actually find this copy anymore, but Howard Clifford seems to have found it. And it says, June 9th, 1898, to Jeff Smith, manager of the would-be Skagway Baseball Club, recognizing the fact that you have some would-be baseball players, we hereby challenge you to play us 3 games for money, beans, or marbles. The first game to be played at our Grand City on Sunday, June 19th at our baseball park. So Dye's put down the gauntlet. They're challenging Soapy and his team to play baseball. We know that Dyea was involved in baseball as early as June 4th of 1898. So on the right-hand side of this screen, there's an article about a benefit that was held, or a ball that was held, a fundraiser that was held for the benefit of the baseball club in Dyea. So it appeared in the June 11th edition of the paper, but it's talking about one from the week before, so the 4th of June. So we know that there were at least a baseball club in Dyea as early as that. On the left-hand side of the screen, you can see a preview of a game that was supposed to be held on the 26th of June, the next day. It mentions that it's the first game of baseball ever played in Dyea. It's supposed to play tomorrow. Now, a couple of things are interesting here. Soapy Smith is not mentioned anywhere in this article on the left-hand side. So it just mentions players on the team. So that's, suggests that maybe he wasn't as involved with the baseball club as Howard Clifford had suspected. But there's no evidence of whether this game was actually played or not, is the other challenge we have. The historical record starts to fray a little bit here. It's not ever mentioned if the game took place, let alone if the 3 games took place, and Soapy Smith isn't mentioned. Kathy Spood, who wrote a book on Soapy Smith, does mention that he may have been involved in trying to start up this baseball team to get himself this. It was something other saloon owners were doing at the time, and again, to give himself that respectability. And you can see on the right-hand side, there's an ad for Jeff Smith's Parlors, so Soapy Smith. Jeffrey Smith is his name. This would have been one of the ads that appeared in the paper. But interestingly, after Soapy was killed, so if you know the story of Soapy Smith, he was gunned down on a dock in Skagway, Juneau Dock in Skagway, after falling into a confrontation with some vigilantes. And in one of the obituaries that ran in the Globe in Toronto, it mentions him as being president of the baseball club, among these many other occupations that it lists here. So it's interesting that, whether it's true or not that he had involvement, he's at least referenced in one obituary as being a president of the baseball club. Another thing that was happening in Skagway were the arrival of the Buffalo Soldiers. So this was Company L of the 24th Infantry. They were a group of all-black soldiers that were dispatched to Alaska in 1899 to maintain order and uphold the law. And so they arrived in May of 1899. And it's at a time where black soldiers are not necessarily welcome. There's a lot of racial prejudice up there. And so one of the things that they did to help win over the residents of Skagway and gain acceptance was to play baseball. So they were one of 3 teams formed in Skagway in May of 1900. So there was the soldier team, as they were referred to. There was a team of railroad workers, the White Pass Boys, and there was a junior team. And so they played their first game in early May or May 20th, and they won, and they're really good. They won most of their games for the first month against the railroad team. And one of the things that's really interesting is that when you start reading the articles in the newspaper, they're never mentioned by name. The white teams always have the names of the players are mentioned in the articles, but the Buffalo Soldiers team are always just referred to as the soldiers, but never the players themselves. But what's interesting is over time, they start to become named in the newspapers. And you can see that that's a sign that they're starting to gain acceptance. So now it's, individual players are being mentioned. The game recaps actually mention the players for the Buffalo Soldiers. So it was a way that they were able to slowly, integrate themselves within that community. And you can see here some of those articles that I mentioned. So the one on the far left-hand side is the 3 teams being organized. The soldiers win the ball game, so they don't mention any of the names. And then on the far right-hand side, it's the first time that the White Pass team actually wins their game against the Buffalo Soldiers. So that's what's happening in Skagway. Now we'll move over to Dawson City. So Dawson City has a bit of an earlier baseball history. So Skagway doesn't really get going until 1899. 1898, you start seeing baseball in Dawson City. So you can see there's a article here from July of 1898 where they talk about the sourdough stiffs and the Chicacos playing a game. And so they talk about the bats being hewed from discarded boat masts, and the balls were all kinds of twine and around wood, and the sand being ankle deep and all these other disadvantages. So they're painting a very colorful picture of what it would have been like to play baseball on the sandbar in Dawson City. Here's another funny article from July of 1898. So they're talking about a game that took place at 11:30 at night. So would be typical. It's doesn't get dark there till very, very late, and even then it's not that dark in July. And so you've got this group of young people in Dawson City, and they're playing in a game. Big crowd, about 500 people there. And you've got some of the characters they've mentioned here. So players named Sourdough and Mackinac and Skinny. And what really sets this game, a couple of things. So one is, I guess, Sourdough is so popular with the crowd that the umpire gives him 4 strikes instead of 3. They like him that much. And the other is this donkey that wanders onto the field and occupies the pitcher's box and starts braying at the crowd. And so Skinny and Mackinac have to get on it and ride it out of the game. It's interesting. They don't mention what the score was. They're talking about those other incidents that happened, but they don't actually record who won the game here. But it's just another colorful example of what baseball would have been like in Dawson City in 1898. Now, fast forward a couple of years, I want to talk about another character named Robert J. Eilbeck. And he is the sheriff of the Yukon, but he has a really colorful path to become get there. He was a baseball pioneer. So in the 1870s in Kingston, Ontario, so not too far from Ottawa, he was credited as one of the 2 people that introduced the game to Kingston. So he arrived from another town, a smaller town, comes to Kingston as a young man, and starts up a baseball club and really gets it popular in Kingston. And he goes on to be an excellent player. You can see him in the middle there. This is when he's later managing, but he's got the big mustache in the middle. He, again, a really ambitious guy. He has a number of jobs. So he's a telegraph operator, a grain merchant, a steamship agent, an insurance agent. He works in local politics in the city of Kingston. He's extremely well connected politically, which helps him secure a political appointment to become the sheriff of the Yukon. In 1888, though, so he's at this point, his playing career, he's still playing, but he's not active as he used to be as a younger man. But he starts a 4-team baseball league, minor league, the Eastern International League, consisting of Kingston, Oswego, Watertown, and Belleville. And this 4-team circuit doesn't last very long, like a lot of leagues at the time. So it starts up in May of 1888. From the start, there's money problems starting. Teams by early July, teams start dropping out of the league because just of money problems. His Kingston team, Eilbeck's Kingston team, ends up winning essentially by attrition because all the other teams have gone bankrupt, and so they win the championship. And so you can see them posing for their championship photo here in their 1888 picture. And he after this goes on to again work in local politics. He's still playing baseball occasionally, pick up baseball, but he gets this appointment to go to the Yukon to become the sheriff of the Yukon, and so he takes it. And he brings baseball with him. So he goes up in 1900, early 1900, arrives in Dawson. Baseball, as we have seen, is already happening in Dawson City, but Robert J. Eilbeck is one of the main drivers behind getting more organized baseball. So he starts the Dawson Amateur Baseball League, consisting of these 4 teams. The Colts are his team. His son Jack had come up with him to Dawson, and he's the 2 of them are senior executives in the league. They also run the Colts. The picture here is interesting. So it's a championship picture of the Colts from the 1904 season. That season actually ended in controversy, and the Colts declared themselves champions. I won't go into sort of how it all came about. It's very complicated, but essentially they declared themselves champions and the rest of the league disagreed. But they still went ahead and got this photo collage of themselves made up with the championship there. So I'll go back to tie up a few loose ends before I open it up for some questions. But we talked to the Berry brothers and what's their legacy? Well, with the fortune that they made in the Klondike, Henry and Clarence became Henry became the controlling owner of the Los Angeles Angels and the Pacific Coast League in 1906. Possibly with also backing from Clarence, but certainly Henry was the controlling owner. He's also the manager of the Angels at that point, and the Angels won 2 pennants in 1907 and 1908 under Henry's management. He sold the Angels in 1914, and then he and his brother Clarence and another gentleman went in and bought the San Francisco Seals, also in the PCL. Now they won a championship the year after they purchased the team under a different manager. So at that point, Henry wasn't managing anymore. He was purely the owner. And another one in 1917. The Berry brothers end up selling the Seals in 1918, and that effectively ends their relationship with baseball, actively involved in baseball. Henry ends up going and dying in a really horrific accident. So he's working at that point at Clarence's oil company. He's visiting a site, and the steering wheel of his car malfunctions and sends him plunging into a deep canyon, and he ends up breaking his neck and dying. And then Clarence died the year after that of appendicitis. Another interesting footnote in the baseball story of the Klondike is John Grieve Lind. So Johnny Lind. He shows up in 40 Mile in 1896. So 40 Mile has cleared out at this point. Everybody's gone down to Rabbit Creek to follow George Carmack. So Lind makes his fortune up there. He goes to the Klondike, stays until 1898, comes back in 1899, and then leaves for good in 1901. He uses the money that he made in the Klondike to buy or to start up St. Mary's Cement Company in Ontario, in St. Mary's, Ontario. In 1994, the St. Mary's Cement Company leased 32 acres of land to the city of St. Mary's for a small fee, a nominal fee. And that parcel became the cornerstone of the town's successful bid for the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum. So today, just to kind of reframe that, the Hall of Fame occupies land provided by St. Mary's Cement, which was a company established with the gold that Johnny Lind brought from the Klondike. So as a small connection again between Klondike and Canadian baseball. And there you can see the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame Museum. So I think I'll stop there. So happy to chat about this if you have any questions.
I gotta ask how you became interested in this portion of history, especially its connection to baseball. This is amazing stuff.
Yeah, it is actually. So I had read, obviously I was familiar with the Klondike Gold Rush, but I didn't know as much as I now know about it. But I had read something about baseball on the ice in a place called Herschel Island. So at the top of Alaska, rather the top of the Yukon. There was a story about baseball being played by these whalers, and I thought, well, that's really interesting. I want to find out more about that. And so I started digging more into northern baseball, just generally, so not specifically on the Klondike at this point. And so I started digging into some of the old whaling logs that these whalers would have had and finding all these great examples of baseball. And I kept digging and I found more and more, including baseball and, like I said, Hudson Bay and Cumberland Sound in the 1860s by these whalers who would basically winter in these places. I thought, well, this is fascinating. And these stories are just amazing of what they're doing. And so I started digging more and more. I thought, okay, well, what would have been happening in the Klondike at that point? Because obviously this is around the same time period. And, was baseball, you assume that it's happening up there too. And so I started reading more, going through diaries, going through old newspaper articles, going through books and reading all these examples. And you find out things like, the Berry brothers and this long tail of their story that starts, baseball, like they're amateur baseball players in California. They make this fabulous fortune up north. And then the long tail of that being, they go on to buy the Angels and the Seals. You think, oh, that's interesting. And then you find more, and it's this Dan Dugdale story about a guy who, he didn't go to the Klondike, and that's the reason why baseball ends up being so successful in the Pacific Northwest. And so I start finding all these stories and think, my goodness, this is I've never read this before. I've never heard this before. I'm just fascinated. So I just kept digging and finding all these little things. And now I'm writing a book on it. So I'm really excited about that.
It sounds like a real rabbit hole, to be honest with with you. You get into it and you can't get out of it, and your knowledge expands so that you just can't stop following till you reach the end. That's really interesting. Once again, I say this a lot that I'm a content creator. I'm a podcaster. I'm a I do these meetings for our chapter and all of SABR and such, and I'm not a researcher. So I envy the researchers who find those subjects that really spark that passion and off they go, because you're the real ones out there doing the work that really makes what SABR is. This is really interesting stuff. I've got one more question before I flip it to some of the others. You displayed the PCL record of the LA Angels in, was that 1915? That went by quick on me.
Yeah, so the Angels were the team that they bought Henry bought in 1906 and sold in 1914. Yeah, so this was a PCL team in back then, and then he and his brother Clarence bought the Seals in 1914.
Did you happen to find any notation or anything that would tell you how many games the PCL was scheduled for that year? Because that win-loss record added up to over 200 games.
Yeah, it's a good question. I haven't really dug into that too much, but definitely something to look into.
If anybody out there knows, let me know, because that's always been something I've been interested in. I know that the PCL played more games on average than Major League Baseball ever did, if I recall correctly, but I'm interested to hear more about this. If you have a question for Steve Rennie, our presenter this evening, do what Gary Joklin did just a minute ago and go down to the bottom of the screen and hit the reaction button. You'll see another button marked raise hand. Click the raise hand button and we'll get you in line to ask questions of Steve. Gary Joklin, you're up. Go.
I have a specific question and a general question. The specific one, first of all, was I guess motivated by the variety of threads that were in this presentation. And I started to almost immediately visualize a Gantt chart where you'd have columns for historical personage name, their place of origin, and a timeline across the top. So you could then begin to track where they'd been over time and the events that they were engaged in, so that if you could see a multitude of people like this over the course of the decades you're looking at, you might be able to draw causation or identify, well, gee, there's a missing connection here between these threads. Are they related? Have you ever tried modeling it like this?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, because that's exactly what I did. So as part of the book I'm writing, I'm trying to figure out how do all these characters intersect, and if they intersect, and what their timelines work out. So I actually did a Gantt chart, like you say,
Awesome.
showing like when they would have been in different places and what time. And then, of course, you start looking into the record. So one of the really interesting things was the Albeck guy that I was talking about, Robert Albeck. There's a game where he's playing, and Frank Berry, so one of the other Berry brothers, is actually the umpire for that game. So there's a small connection there between the three, and so the Gantt chart does help with that sort of thing, because you can see who's where at what time. And I think the thing that stood out to me most is just you think of the gold rush and these tens of thousands of people who are flooding the area, but it actually is quite small when you start digging into it and realize that a lot of these people kind of pop up in the same places.
The general question I had that perhaps you can respond to maybe at the end if you so choose is it would be just great to hear a brief overview of what baseball is like in Canada, to what degree it's played, are there leagues, and whether or not the current relationship between our countries is causing any resentment towards the game.
Well, I mean, it has a long history in Canada too, right? We've been playing baseball since, some people say up 1838, if you go to Beachville. So the game has been in Canada for extremely long time as well. So I think that people here love baseball, not because it's an American sport or anything like that. It's, people also have a long history with it as well. So in some of these Southern Ontario communities, for instance, baseball has been around far longer than hockey. And so it's really ingrained in a lot of these different communities. So I don't get the sense that people are resenting baseball because they consider it to be an American sport. I think people love baseball because it's just been something that's been part of both our countries for so many decades.
It's cool. It brings people together. One last comment is that I'd love to see some form of a Gantt chart timeline integrated within your slides. That would be really cool to see that dot move as your narrative proceeds.
Yeah, for sure. I could probably weave that in at some point. For me, it's been helpful because as I'm sort of writing the book, I'm very much trying to think of how would I structure this as if it were a movie. So I'm trying to write it almost in scenes, and it does help to have that chart because it just allows you to sort of like the way it's helped me to write it anyway is to visualize it like, okay, so scene one would be this, and we can go back to this, and so that's been actually quite a lot of fun.
Yeah, present it in tracks. Awesome. Thank you.
Fantastic stuff. That great suggestions. Fantastic stuff over here. Where's Ryan McClanahan? He had his hand up. Ryan, you got a question?
I do. Yeah, hey, this is awesome. Thank you so much. How influential was the Klondike to forming or founding the PCL?
Well, the PCL really kind of came out of the 1897 San Francisco Examiner baseball tournament. So in 1897, the newspaper, the Examiner, and a bunch of local politicians in San Francisco organized a massive baseball tournament. And if you're interested in that, Chris Good is the author of a book called California Baseball.
Yep.
Can't recommend the book enough. Really great resource. And he talks about how that tournament really does sort of set in motion what will become the PCL a couple of years later. But in terms of the gold rush and its influence, I think that if you look back at the Angels specifically, and to a lesser degree the Seals, they did very well when Henry Berry came in with his money and later as a manager. So I think you can draw a pretty nice line between his fortune and success up in the Klondike, and obviously his love of baseball, coming and then using some of his fortune to buy the club, and then he manages the club. They go on to success. He's considered one of the better managers in the PCL in those early days. So Chris Good speaks very highly of him in the book as just a really influential figure in those early days of the PCL. So PCL, would have existed without the Berries, but certainly with the Berries involved, they had, at least those teams had a lot more success than perhaps they would have.
Oh, yeah, awesome. Thank you so much.
Ryan, we might actually have that book that was just referenced in our library. I'm going to have to struggle to remember to take a look for you so that you could take that one out too, just like you did Collision at Home Plate. Hopefully you're enjoying that. It's just it popped into my head. I think we have that book. I'll have to take a look for you.
Okay.
So one small note actually on the Chris Good book too, though, is so it mentions that Henry Berry had gone and played in that San Francisco Examiner tournament, which I thought was fascinating, but it's not true. So if you read the old newspaper articles from the time, there's mention of Henry and leaving for the Klondike in March and April of 1897. So a few months before the tournament would have began. And he didn't come back for baseball. So the tournament happened while he was gone. So, but at first I was very excited to think that, potentially he had played in this tournament as well, because it would have been, many teams were involved in this. But I was sad to find out that, in fact, that wasn't the case.
Good stuff.
Okay.
Good stuff. All right. Well, look, we're back next week, Monday, July 14th, with Phil Coffin and his book, A Baseball Book of Days, 31 Moments That Transformed the Game. The link to sign up is available in the chapter meeting booklet at the SABR events calendar. And finally, if you are a baseball fan watching on YouTube and you like what you see, please like this video and subscribe to our channel to be alerted to each of our weekly uploads. And if you're not yet a member, you need to join the Society for American Baseball Research, the premier baseball community, offering an amazing baseball buffet of options to explore your fandom. SABR boasts more than 35 different research committees, over 80 regional chapters, and innumerable opportunities to connect with baseball minds across the world, like Steve's. For more information, go to sabr.org today. Steve Rennie, you are amazing. Thank you very much for doing this.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's a
This
pleasure.
has been fantastic. I really appreciate you. We're going to have to get you back on for that other presentation you talked about, and I'll be emailing you on that very, very soon. All right?
I'd be happy to do it.
I got you, and the chat's blowing up. Great presentation. Thanks. Thank you, Steve. This was fun. Things like that. So you did good, kid. Good for you. Let's get everybody out of here. We're going to see you next week, Monday at 7 o'clock. All right. Have a good night, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.